The second bill I have on here is S108. It's a first responder death benefit bill. And the reason I selected that as something to talk about is it's an example of how constituents can come to me with an idea that I then take up in Columbia and able to enact into law. There were two retired law enforcement officers in Beaufort County that came to me 2 years ago and said that South Carolina was one of the few states that did not have a death benefit for law enforcement officers who were killed in the line of duty. And so I sat down and drafted legislation that would provide a $150,000 one-time death benefit to the families of law enforcement officers who were killed in the line of duty. That's an example of a bill that was so popular, the day after I filed it, it got co-sponsors among all the other members of the Senate. And then as it moved through the process, as it moved through the Finance Committee and onto the Senate floor, and then over to the House, Ways and Means, and to the House floor, it got expanded, okay? So initially it was designed to pay a one-time death benefit to law enforcement officers who were killed in the line of duty. It got expanded to include firefighters as well, professional firefighters and volunteer firefighters. And then finally it was expanded to include EMT that are also putting themselves in harm's way in emergency situations. And so the bill that was ultimately signed by Governor McMaster into law in May became not just a law enforcement death benefit bill, but a first responder death benefit bill. And I picked this bill out to talk about for two reasons. One is an example of how constituents who have good ideas that might not otherwise occur to me can then make a difference by relaying those ideas, making the case for it. And if you go up into Columbia and marshal your arguments and make the case, you can actually change the law. And I think that's important for people to realize, because sometimes in politics, I think constituencies feel powerless, or they feel like they really can't change the course of things, or they feel like these things are beyond their control. I single this bill as an example of that's not the case. You can always change things if you have a good idea and if you take the time to make the argument. The second reason I singled it out as a bill to talk about is a state talks about what's important to it through how it spends your money. And it says something about South Carolina that we go ahead and provide death benefits to these first responders. It means that the state recognizes and understands the importance they play in our society and the sacrifices that those families make in those regards.